What's up guys, welcome back to my channel Dow to the Buzzer. And since the OKC Thunder won the championship a bit over a week ago, a lot of very interesting things have gone down in the NBA. From draft drama to blockbuster trades to very important free agency signings. So this video is going to recap all those crazy things that have happened in the NBA, because trust me, there's a lot of them. And before I get into this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're just a couple weeks in and we already have 300 subscribers, which is insane. So thank you to everyone that subscribed and who watched that first video, the Kobe one. That video blew up. So if you haven't seen it yet, make sure you go and check it out after this video and drop a subscribe so I can keep uploading more content for y'all. Thank you so much, and let's get back into it. Now, this year's NBA offseason started before the playoffs even finished, with Kevin Durant getting moved in a blockbuster deal where the Phoenix Suns traded him to the Houston Rockets for Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, the 10th pick in the draft, and 5 second rounders. Now, I'm going to be dropping a video about this trade very soon on my channel, going more in depth about the trade, but a brief summary, I think this is an amazing deal for the Houston Rockets, and I think KD on this Rockets team is just a match made in heaven. KD fills all the holes and weaknesses that this Rockets team had last year. He brings efficient scoring, consistency, playoff experience, versatility, and he's another player that can handle the ball and play make, that can take the load off of Fred VanVleet this season. And the Rockets have made many other moves this offseason that I'll get into later on in the video that make me believe that they're absolutely one of the best teams in the league, and don't be surprised if you see them in the Western Conference Finals next year. And as for Phoenix, I'm assuming they're going to trade Jalen Green for a point guard that can help them win right away, and I do like how Dillon Brooks fits into this Phoenix roster. But overall, Phoenix is in a pretty tough spot due to how Bradley Beal has them under constraint with his contract. Now moving on to the NBA draft, where the Dallas Mavericks headlined it with the #1 overall pick that they had a 1.8% chance of getting. I wonder how that happened. But regardless of how they got the pick, it still ended up in their hands, and it was up to them to make the right decision, and they made the pick we all knew was coming.
Dallas Mavericks select Cooper Flagg from Duke University.
Now, Cooper Flagg is just the player that Nico Harrison was looking for to fit into this defensive-minded and big man-oriented roster that he has in Dallas, and I'm really excited to see how this Dallas Mavericks front court works out with Cooper Flagg, Anthony Davis, and Derek Lively, all of them super athletic, long, and extremely good defensively. My only nitpick with this team is that Cooper Flagg isn't the best shooter, and he was expected to come into the league as a power forward, but he's now forced into the small forward spot, so I can see him, AD, and Lively not being that good at stretching the floor. But with Kyrie and Klay Thompson at the guard spot, you don't need that good spacing. And then you have PJ Washington, one of the best three-point shooting small forwards, coming off the bench. I can see them running a lot of Cooper Flagg and Washington lineups, or lineups with AD at center and Flagg at power forward and stretching the floor that way. So all in all, I'm very excited to see how this Mavericks team looks, and I can see them being top 3 or top 4 in the Western Conference. Nico Harrison cooked with this lineup, I can't lie. And with the 2nd overall pick, the Spurs drafted Dylan Harper, making him their 3rd point guard on the lineup, so I don't exactly know what to think about this fit. At the time, trading for De'Aaron Fox was a great deal for the Spurs. Fox was able to be mentored by Chris Paul in a similar way that SGA was mentored by CP3 when he was on Oklahoma, and he would be able to get Victor early playoff experience before he reaches his prime. But now in hindsight, De'Aaron Fox is taking minutes from guys like Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper, who have insane potential and will probably be the big 3 around Victor Wembanyama later down in his career. And worst of all 3 of them play in a very similar way. All 3 are scoring point guards that aren't the best playmakers and are very good at attacking the basket but can't shoot the ball exceptionally well. The only good thing is that Dylan Harper is about 6'6", making him a pretty big point guard, and he could probably transition into different positions, but I just don't like the idea of having 3 point guards that all play the same way on the Spurs team. So I'm not as big as them as other people are, but they still have a very good roster outside of that, with Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan, and obviously Victor Wembanyama is going to be taking another big leap this year. So I can see the Spurs also making the playoffs, but a lot of people have them being a top 4 or 5 team in the West, and I think you have to be extremely well fit as well as having a talented roster to be a high seed in the Western Conference, not just talent alone. And with the 3rd pick, the Sixers drafted VJ Edgecombe. I already made a YouTube short about the Sixers next year and my expectations for them, as well as VJ Edgecombe's fit in that roster. So if you're a Sixers fan and you want to see my opinions on it, go check out that video. But to make a long story short, I like Edgecombe's fit on this roster. Now, he may not be in the Rookie of the Year race just because of how many scorers are on the Sixers team, but I think he could come in and make an immediate impact on the Sixers team and could be the missing piece they need to help them get over the hump for next year. Now, some other notable picks from this draft was Con Kneppel at 4, and he isn't the pick I would have made. He fits well into this roster, don't get me wrong, but I think anyone would fit well into the Hornets roster considering how many needs they have, but he's a good spot-up shooter who doesn't need the ball in his hands that much, so I can see him complementing LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller on offense. And with the 4th overall pick, we saw Ace Bailey's pre-draft strategy backfire heavily as he was banished to the great Mormon state of Utah. And for those who don't know, Ace Bailey was previously projected to be the 3rd overall pick, but then he ended up falling because he refused to work out with many teams early on in the 1st round because he didn't want to get drafted to teams like the Sixers, the Hornets, or the Utah Jazz. Sadly for him, his worst nightmare came true. But jokes aside, I think people are being way too harsh on Ace Bailey. Obviously what he did wasn't the professional thing to do, but I think people are now using his off-court actions to justify not liking him as a player, even though I think Ace Bailey is an incredibly talented player who has all-star or all-NBA potential, maybe not in a Utah Jazz uniform, but I still have faith that in his time in Utah he's going to play his heart out and be one of the best players to come out of this draft class. A couple other notable draft picks was Kaman Maluwak falling all the way to 10th to the Phoenix Suns, which is just a perfect fit for him, and then the Brooklyn Nets having 5 first-round picks and using 3 of them on point guards that can't shoot. I don't know what's going on in Brooklyn, but they got to figure it out. Now let's move on into free agency, where the Atlanta Hawks are absolutely killing it. They lost Clint Capella, Karis LeVert, Larry Nance Jr., George Niang, and Terrence Mann this offseason, all players that were pretty much expendable, but then you get back Nickeil Alexander-Walker on a 4-year deal, you get Luke Kennard on a 1-year deal, and you trade for Kristaps Porzingis. All these guys could come in and contribute right away, and as long as Kristaps Porzingis stays healthy, I think he's a perfect pick and roll, pick and pop player next to Trae Young, and I can see the Hawks making a 4th or 5th seed push next year. And then we have the Boston Celtics, and after they won the championship in 2024, we all thought they'd be running the league for years, but now their championship roster has officially been blown up. Jason Tatum is missing all of next year with an Achilles injury. They traded Kristaps Porzingis to the Atlanta Hawks, and Drew Holiday was traded to the Portland Trail Blazers for Anthony Simons. And what this proves is that the second apron is no joke. No team wants to get into that mess. The Boston Celtics had a championship contending roster, and even with Tatum injured, they still had a good chance of making the playoffs with Jaylen Brown alone. But you give up all these role players to risk not getting into the second apron, and don't be surprised in a couple years when a team like the OKC Thunder, who we all think is going to dominate the league for years, is going to have to do the same thing. And I think the Celtics collapse is just the start and the first example of dynasties in the NBA, whether made naturally through the draft or through free agency, will be extinct. Now moving on to the Brooklyn Nets, where this free agency they lost D'Angelo Russell to the Dallas Mavericks and they traded Cameron Johnson to the Denver Nuggets for Michael Porter Jr. And I cannot wait for the memes of Cam Thomas and Michael Porter Jr. playing on the same team. And you know, in hindsight, Brooklyn drafting 3 pass-first point guards in the 1st round might have been their best idea they ever had, because the Brooklyn Nets box score is about to look like a My Career game where your player has 40 shots and the point guard has 20 assists. Now the Chicago Bulls, in very Chicago Bulls fashion, just traded Lonzo Ball to the Cavs for Isaac Okoro. And I think at this point, teams are just bullying Chicago, because tell me how you get rid of Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Nikola Vucevic, and across all of those trades, get 1 pick in return, and that pick being your own. At this point, get Kenny Beachum in office. Bulls fans have been through enough. Now the Dallas Mavericks are re-signing Kyrie Irving and Dante Exum and replacing Dinwiddie with D'Angelo Russell. And as we all know, Kyrie Irving tore his ACL and will be out for majority of next season, which means D'Angelo Russell will have to fill in that starting point guard role, which I'm not very confident he could do at this point in his career. But as long as he could keep the Mavericks afloat for majority of the season and then play his role off the bench when Kyrie returns, I think Dallas can make a deep playoff run this year. Now moving on to the Denver Nuggets, who in my opinion have been one of the biggest winners, if not the biggest winner of this entire free agency. After signing back Bruce Brown, who was a great contributor to their championship winning roster a couple years ago, you trade Michael Porter Jr. for Cameron Johnson, who is a way better fit for this team. You signed Tim Hardaway Jr. to be an elite 3-point shooter off the bench, and you get Jonas Valanciunas, so now the Nuggets can finally take Nikola Jokic off the court and not get destroyed in the minutes he doesn't play, because they have a serviceable big man now. And I'm not gonna lie, I thought last year's Nuggets team was one of the weakest teams they put together in the last couple years, but this year they have great all-around talent with players that fit with each other perfectly. I will not be surprised at all if the Nuggets make the finals or maybe even win the championship this year. Now moving on to Detroit, I do not know what to think of their free agency, because they added Karis LeVert and Duncan Robinson, both very good additions, but then you lose Hardaway Jr. and Dennis Schroeder, who were very important to the Pistons' success last year. So it all comes down to the final verdict of Malik Beasley, who is currently being investigated right now for gambling on games, which is something the NBA or the feds do not take lightly at all. But I hope he beats the case like Terry Rozier did, because it was really fun to see that Pistons team surprise everyone and be a really good team last year, and him almost leading the league in threes was a huge part of their success. And in more breaking news, the Golden State Warriors did basically nothing other than lose Kevon Looney, who was a huge part of their team for the last couple years. And you'll never catch me feeling bad for Warriors fans. I actually find it funny when I see them complain about their team, considering how cooked they had the league for like 4 years. But I'm not gonna lie, this offseason has to be depressing for Warriors fans. They're probably the biggest losers of this year's free agency. But in brighter news, the biggest winners of this year's free agency is probably the Houston Rockets. As I already said, I'm gonna get more into the Kevin Durant trade in a later video, but the signings this year were just amazing. They signed Steven Adams back, they signed back Aaron Holiday, Jeff Green, they signed back Jabari Smith to a fat contract, which I don't know is worth it, but we'll see if he earns that money down the line. They re-signed Fred VanVleet to a cheaper 2-year $50 million deal, which is better than the contract he was on before, but I still don't think he's worth $25 million. But they also signed back Clint Capella to be a third-string center, which I think is great, and they had Dorian Finney-Smith, who perfectly fits into the Houston Rockets team as well. Houston probably won this year's free agency. Indiana lost Miles Turner this year, but with Tyrese Halliburton out for next season, I think the Pacers are just going to go through the motions, not really sign anyone big, and probably just make the playoffs as a lower seed. The Los Angeles Lakers extended Austin Reeves' contract to 5 years, $246 million, which is just a bad deal in my opinion. And I get Austin Reeves is a great player, but I think he's going to cap out at a fringe all-star level player. And in 5 years, when he's going to be almost 32 years old, this $50 million deal is going to backfire heavily for the Lakers. But at least they finally got their center in DeAndre Ayton, which is better than nothing, but they lost in the first round in 5 games last year. They're going to need better than nothing to improve to the point where they're championship contenders, and DeAndre Ayton isn't a guy that really contributes much to a basketball game outside what his stats say. So I do expect to see improvements in the Lakers this year, but I still don't put them in the championship contender tier. In news that shocked all of us, the Milwaukee Bucks waived Damian Lillard, and we all know that he tore his Achilles, but this was just a very surprising move for the Bucks. Apparently Giannis isn't happy about it either. They signed Miles Turner from the Pacers to replace Brook Lopez, so still expect the Bucks to be in the playoffs because they still have Giannis and a solid team around him, but it just seems like the Bucks have been in limbo and just settling for a very average team while Giannis is about to reach his 30s. The Minnesota Timberwolves were able to re-sign Naz Reid and Julius Randle to pretty team-friendly deals. Naz Reid for 5 years, $25 million a year, and Julius Randle for 3 years, $33 million a year. And other than that, they haven't really made many other moves. I expected them to look for a point guard to replace Mike Conley while Rob Dillingham still develops, but they haven't made any moves of that sort. They lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker, so it seems like they're really just running back the same team as last year and hoping that improvements from Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels will help them reach the finals. But I don't think that's going to work out with how exceptional the Western Conference is this year. The New York Knicks have fired Tom Thibodeau and signed Jordan Clarkson, and those two moves help aid the biggest problem the Knicks had last year, which was their bench. Tom Thibodeau never played them, and the bench was never that good to begin with. But Jordan Clarkson could give you 20 points on any night off the bench, making this overall a pretty good offseason for the New York Knicks. Now, the OKC Thunder obviously had a pretty uneventful free agency, considering they're already the best team in the NBA this year by far, but they did re-sign Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to the biggest contract in NBA history, where he'll be making almost $1 million per game. That's real money, man. I should have been in the league. That should be me making 71 mil, but you know, YouTube's good too, I guess. Yeah. But that's basically it for the summary of the first week of this year's offseason. It's been a pretty eventful one considering this year's free agency class wasn't that great, but overall, let me know what you guys think of your team and how they did in this year's free agency. Make sure to like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for watching, and we're out.